The chainsaw's roar still echoes in my memory. It was a sound no homeowner ever wants to hear at dawn, especially when it's coming from your own front yard. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But when I rushed outside barefoot, heart racing, I saw her, Karen, hands on her hips, sunglasses perched arrogantly on her nose, barking orders at two men who were already halfway through cutting the branches of my oak tree, and in that moment, I knew life in our little suburban paradise was about to change forever, 6 months earlier. When I first moved into Willow Creek, I thought I had found the American dream wrapped up in a picket fence. Wide streets lined with maples and oaks, kids riding their bikes until sunset, and neighbors who waved as they mowed their lawns. It wasn't Beverly Hills, but it was clean, quiet, and most importantly, safe. And then there was my oak tree, a towering, century-old giant that shaded the front of my house in the summer and dropped golden leaves every fall. My kids built a swing on one of its strongest branches. On hot afternoons, I'd sit under it with a cold beer, grateful for the cool shade. That tree wasn't just wood and leaves. It was history. A reminder that some things in life are worth keeping. But apparently, Karen didn't see it that way. You know, the type. Every neighborhood has one. Perfectly trimmed bob haircut, clipboard in hand, and a voice that could cut glass. Karen wasn't just a member of the Homeowners Association, she was the HOA. Or at least, she acted like it. If a car stuck out an inch from a driveway, Karen noticed. If someone's grass grew too long, Karen sent an email. And if a holiday decoration wasn't community appropriate, well, let's just say she had strong opinions about that, too. She lived 3 houses down, in a pristine 2-story with beige shutters and flower beds that looked like they were ripped out of a catalog. Her house was her pride, her kingdom. And she treated the entire neighborhood as if it belonged to her. At first, I thought it was funny. Even harmless. A woman with too much free time policing everyone else's lives. But the first time she mentioned my tree, I realized just how wrong I was. It was at a summer block party. Lemonade in hand, neighbors gathered under the warm glow of string lights. Karen walked up to me with that tight smile she wore whenever she was about to say something unpleasant. "You know," she said, tilting her head toward the oak tree, "that thing looks dangerous." I laughed it off. Dangerous? Karen, it's been here longer than any of us. It's solid as a rock. Her smile sharpened. Still, the HOA has rules about trees that could pose a liability. If it fell, well, I'd hate to see the damage it could do. I raised an eyebrow. Rules? I read the bylaws front to back before I moved in. There's nothing about healthy trees. Karen's lips thinned. Maybe not yet, but I'll bring it up at the next meeting. She walked away before I could respond. And that was the first time I felt the unease, the sense that she wasn't just talking. She was planning. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing things. Quiet warnings from other residents. "Careful with Karen," Mrs. Thompson next door whispered while trimming her roses. She had the Smiths repaint their fence 3 times because she didn't like the shade of white. "She got my son's car towed once," another neighbor muttered. "Claimed it was an eyesore. It was parked in our own driveway." It was becoming clear. Karen had a history. And she didn't stop until she got what she wanted. So when I noticed her, staring at my oak tree more and more often, sometimes standing across the street with her phone out, snapping pictures, I knew it was only a matter of time. That fall, the HOA scheduled its quarterly meeting. I almost skipped it, but something told me I needed to be there. And sure enough, Karen brought up the matter of hazardous trees. Her eyes never left mine as she spoke. I raised my hand, calmly stating, "The tree in question is healthy. I had it inspected last year by a licensed arborist." "There is no hazard." Karen pursed her lips. "Well, just because you say so doesn't make it true." The room grew tense. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Some rolled their eyes. Others nodded along with her that it wasn't a full-blown argument, not yet. But I could feel the line being drawn in the sand. Looking back, I wish I had taken her words more seriously. I wish I had known that Karen wasn't just making idle threats. Because people like her, the ones who believe rules don't apply to them, will always find a way to push further. And in her mind, my tree wasn't just an oak. It was defiance. It was resistance to her control, and Karen couldn't tolerate that. That night, as I stood by the window, I looked out at my oak tree swaying gently in the evening breeze. I had no idea that in just a few short months, Karen would take matters into her own hands, and that the very tree she despised would be the one to bring her empire crashing down. The envelope was plain white, no return address. I almost tossed it in the junk pile until I noticed the words stamped in bold across the front. Official HOA notice. My stomach sank. Inside, a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no signature. Just a typed line. All homeowners are reminded to maintain landscaping to community safety standards. Trees presenting potential hazards may be subject to HOA action. It didn't name me directly, but I didn't need a liar to know who it was aimed at. Karen had made her first move. I called the HOA secretary, a sweet retiree named Linda who handled most of the administrative work. "Linda," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "what's this about?" She sighed on the other end. "Don't worry too much." Karen insisted we send it out. "It's not a bylaw change, just—" Her way of making noise. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. "So this isn't official?" "Not really. But with Karen, things never stay small. Watch yourself." That warning lingered in my mind long after I hung up. Within days, the whispers started. At the mailbox, neighbors made polite conversation but always glanced at the oak tree behind me. At the HOA meeting bulletin board, someone had pinned an article titled, "The Dangers of Aging Trees in Residential Areas." I didn't need Sherlock Holmes to know who pinned it there. One evening, as I dragged the trash bins to the curb, Karen appeared on the sidewalk, arms folded. "You got the notice, I assume?" she said. I forced a smile. "Oh, you mean your little scare letter?" Cute. Her eyes narrowed. "It's not just about you. That tree is a liability for everyone on this street." I gestured toward it. "Karen, it's perfectly healthy. Stronger than the foundation of your house." "Don't be so sure," she snapped, before spinning on her heel and marching away. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just pushing. She was obsessed. Not everyone agreed with her, though. One evening, my neighbor Charles strolled over while walking his dog. "You know she's targeting you, right?" he said quietly. "Trust me, I've noticed." He chuckled. "Karen's been on a power trip ever since she got voted vice president of the HOA. Thinks she's running for Congress. Don't let her scare you." Easy for him to say. Charles didn't have a 100-year-old oak tree in his yard. By October, Karen had managed to wedge tree safety onto the HOA's official agenda. I walked into the community hall, already bracing myself. Karen stood at the front like she owned the place, flicking through a slideshow. Pictures of fallen trees crushing cars and houses, dramatic headlines about lawsuits, even a video clip of a storm toppling a massive pine. Finally, she gestured toward me. "And we have one such risk right here in Willow Creek." All eyes turned. I stood slowly. "With respect, my tree isn't rotting. It isn't leaning. It isn't a hazard. I have an arborist's report to prove it." I pulled a folder from my bag, flipping it open. "Here, documented, signed, dated." A murmur rippled through the room. Karen's lips tightened. "Reports can be wrong. And when it crashes through my bedroom, will you take responsibility?" I locked eyes with her. "If it crashes, sure. But it won't. You can't bully people into cutting down trees just because you don't like the shade. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then someone coughed. Someone else clapped softly. Not everyone, but enough to make Karen's face burn red. The meeting ended, but her glare followed me all the way out the door. Thought maybe, just maybe, she'd back off after losing that round. But a week later, I spotted her standing on the sidewalk with two men I didn't recognize. They wore work boots and hard hats, pointing up at the oak tree while she gestured a NIMATEDLY. I stormed outside. "Karen, what's going on?" She plastered on a fake smile. "Oh, just getting some professional opinions. On my property?" "They were just looking from the sidewalk," she said innocently. Public space. The workers looked uncomfortable, muttered something to her, and left. But not before giving me a sympathetic shrug. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing her plotting, scheming, waiting for her chance. The holidays came. Snow blanketed the neighborhood, and for a while, Karen seemed to ease up. She busied herself with HOA newsletters and holiday decorations that looked like they belonged in a Martha Stewart catalog, but I should have known better. Karen wasn't the type to forget. She was the type to bide her time. One January morning, I found another envelope tucked under my doormat. No HOA letterhead this time. Just a handwritten note. "If you won't take care of that tree, I will." The handwriting was blocky, anonymous. But I knew. Oh, I knew. I stared at my oak tree, its branches heavy with snow, and felt a chill deeper than the winter air dot because Karen wasn't bluffing. She was promising. They say HOA meetings are boring. Ours felt more like a courtroom drama, and Karen was the prosecutor, with my oak tree on trial. By the time February rolled in, the tension in Willow Creek was thick enough to cut with a knife. Neighbors whispered at mailboxes. Cars slowed down when they passed my yard. Everyone knew Karen wasn't done with me. So when the HOA announced a special community meeting, I already had that sinking feeling in my gut. The topic was tree safety guidelines, not potholes, not snow removal, not budgets, just trees. Translation: Karen's personal vendetta dressed up as community concern. I walked into the community hall and the place was packed. Folding chairs lined every wall, the air buzzing with chatter and coffee. But at the front stood Karen like she owned the building. Clipboard in hand, projector ready. She had been waiting for this moment. "Good evening," she began, her voice sharp and rehearsed. "Tonight we need to address a serious risk in our neighborhood. Hazardous trees." The first slide clicked. A photo of a tree crushed on top of a car. Gasps. The second slide, another tree smashed through the roof of a home. The room fell silent. Karen folded her arms, eyes sweeping across the audience. "This is not fear-mongering," she said, tapping the images with a laser pointer. "This is reality. These accidents happen every day. And if we ignore them, we are all at risk." Her eyes locked on me like a spotlight. "And we have a prime example right here in Willow Creek." The next slide filled the screen with a picture of my oak tree, zoomed in and framed like a mugshot. My jaw tightened. "This tree," she declared, "is a disaster waiting to happen. It towers dangerously close to homes. Its branches stretch across the street. When it falls, and make no mistake, it will cause devastation. And let me be clear, the liability will not just fall on the homeowner. It will fall on all of us as a community." Murmurs rippled across the room. Some neighbors shifted nervously in their chairs, others looked directly at me. Karen pressed forward, voice rising with every word. "That's why I'm proposing a new HOA mandate. Any tree deemed hazardous by board inspection must be removed at the homeowner's expense." There was scattered applause. Not unanimous, but enough to make my stomach sink. It was my turn now. I stood slowly, holding my folder in one hand. Karen makes a compelling slideshow, I said, keeping my voice calm. But let's not confuse fear with facts. All eyes turned to me. My tree isn't rotting. It isn't leaning. It isn't hollow. It's been inspected by a certified arborist who documented in writing that it's healthy and safe. I held up the report and flipped it open so the front rows could see the signature and date. This isn't an opinion. This is professional evaluation. Evidence. I let the silence settle before continuing. What Karen is asking for isn't safety. It's control. She doesn't like the tree, so she wants it gone. But that's not how bylaws work. Homeowners don't lose their rights just because one person decides they should. Karen's face turned crimson. Professional evaluations can be wrong. She snapped. Sure, I said. But they're worth a lot more than one person's grudge. The room gasped. A few people laughed under their breath. Karen's voice cracked like a whip. Do you want a child crushed in the street before you admit your tree is dangerous? I met her glare without flinching. Do you want every homeowner stripped of their rights just because you don't like what's in their yard? The room erupted in noise. People talking over each other, some siding with me, some nodding with her. The HOA president slammed his gavel against the table. Order, order. The chatter died. This is a serious matter, the president said. But until there's clear evidence of hazard, we cannot force a homeowner to remove private property. The bylaws don't support this mandate. Relief washed over me, though I didn't let it show. For now, I had won. Karen's proposal was dead, but the fire in her eyes told me the battle was far from over. When the meeting ended, a few neighbors gave me pats on the back. Good job standing up to her, one whispered. Another muttered, she's losing it, but others avoided eye contact. Caught in the middle of the feud, Karen herself stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots on the tile floor. As she passed me, she leaned in close, just enough for me to hear. This isn't over, she hissed. Not by a long shot. That night I sat on my porch, staring at the oak tree glowing under the streetlight. Its branches swayed gently in the breeze, strong, steady, innocent. I thought the meeting had settled it. I thought I'd finally silenced her, but people like Karen don't stop when they lose in the open. They just change their strategy. And I had no idea her next move wouldn't be words at a meeting. It would be saws and axes. In my front yard, the morning it happened, the air felt wrong. You know that strange heaviness before a storm, when everything is still but charged, like nature itself is holding its breath? That's what I woke up to. No wind, no birdsong, just silence. Then, faintly, the hum of engines. At first, I thought it was roadwork down the street. But when the low rumble grew louder, rattling the windows, I pulled back the curtain and froze. Parked in front of my house was a massive flatbed truck, loaded with chainsaws, ladders, and a crew of men in orange vests. And standing beside them, arms crossed and chin high like a general before battle, was Karen. My heart pounded. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. I threw on a jacket and rushed outside. What the hell is going on? I demanded. Karen turned slowly, a smile tugging at her lips. Good morning, she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. We're here to take care of your tree. You can't be serious, I shot back. We had this out at the meeting. The board ruled against you. She waved a hand dismissively. The board drags its feet. I'm thinking about safety. I've hired a contractor myself. You should be thanking me. The foreman stepped forward, clipboard in hand. We've been hired to remove this tree. Is this your property? Yes, it's my property, and you don't have permission to touch a single branch. The crew hesitated, glancing between me and Karen. She snapped, Don't listen to him. He's endangering the entire neighborhood. I'm the HOA secretary, and this tree is a code violation. My fists clenched. That's a lie. There is no violation, and you damn well know it. The foreman shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, we need written authorization from the property owner. Without it, we can't proceed. Karen's smile faltered, but only for a moment. Then consider this my authorization. I represent the HOA. This tree is coming down today. Before I could argue again, the shrill roar of a chainsaw split the air. One of the workers had already started it up, blade whining as he approached the trunk. Stop! I shouted, stepping in front of the tree. You take one swing at this tree and I'm calling the cops. This is criminal trespassing and property destruction. That made the foreman freeze. He looked at me, then at Karen. Is what he's saying true? Do you actually have legal authority? Karen's face turned red. Don't let him scare you. He's bluffing. If we wait for his so-called permission, someone could get hurt when this monster falls. Monster? I laughed bitterly, my voice shaking. This tree has been here longer than any of us. It's healthy, it's safe, and you just can't stand that it doesn't bend to your will. The neighbors began to gather, drawn by the noise. Curtains twitched open, doors creaked, and soon a small crowd formed on the sidewalk. Phones came out, recording everything. Karen saw them, and her expression twisted. She thrived on drama when she controlled the story. But cameras didn't lie, and now her actions were plain for everyone to see. One of the neighbors called out, Karen, are you out of your mind? You can't just cut down someone else's tree. Stay out of this. She snapped. When that tree crushes your car, don't come crying to me. The foreman killed the chainsaw with a flick, the sudden silence almost louder than the noise had been. He rubbed his temples. Look, ma'am, we can't risk a lawsuit. Without proof of ownership or a court order, we're not touching this tree. Karen spun on him, fury in her eyes. I'm paying you. You work for me. And I don't work in handcuffs, he said flatly. We're done here, he motioned to his crew. Grumbling, they started loading their gear back onto the truck. The crowd murmured, some chuckling, some shaking their heads. Karen's face contorted, humiliation burning through her composure. She turned on me, finger stabbing the air. This isn't over. You think you've won, but the HOA will side with me. You'll regret this. I held her gaze, steady, calm, though my heart still hammered in my chest. No, Karen, the only one who'll regret this is you. For a long moment, it felt like the whole street was holding its breath again. Then she let out a strangled noise, half scream, half growl, and stormed off to her SUV, slamming the door so hard it echoed down the block. The truck followed slowly behind her, engines rumbling, leaving only silence and the faint smell of gasoline. The neighbors lingered, buzzing with whispers. Some came up to me, patting my shoulder, assuring me I'd done the right thing. One woman muttered, she's finally lost it. Another laughed. Caught in 4,000. She won't live this down. But I knew better. Karen wasn't finished. People like her don't quit when they lose in public. They just go underground. More cunning, more dangerous. That night, I sat under the oak tree with a glass of whiskey, listening to the leaves rustle overhead. It stood tall, unbothered, as if the chaos of the day hadn't touched it. But I couldn't shake the thought that Karen's obsession had just crossed a line. She wasn't playing by rules anymore. And the next time she came after me, she wouldn't bring contractors. She'd bring the HOA itself. The letter came on a Wednesday, folded neatly into an official-looking envelope with the HOAS logo stamped in blue ink. At first glance, I thought it was the usual newsletter, the kind that rambled about garage sale dates and community, BBQs. But when I tore it open, my stomach dropped. It wasn't an invitation. It was a violation notice. According to the letter, my property was out of compliance with HOA landscaping standards. Specifically, it cited an overgrown tree creating potential hazard and aesthetic disharmony within the community. I read it twice, my hands tightening with each word. It was my oak tree. Again, attached was a fine, $200, payable within 30 days. Failure to comply, the letter warned, would result in escalating penalties and possible legal action. I laughed bitterly, though it wasn't funny. Karen had lost with her slideshow. She had failed with her contractors. Now she had found another weapon, the HOA board itself. I marched down to the HOA office that afternoon, letter in hand. The board met in a bland beige building that smelled faintly of copier toner and stale coffee. Behind the front desk sat the president, Mr. Whitaker, a man whose gray suit seemed permanently attached to his frame. He adjusted his glasses when I walked in, as though he had been expecting me. "I assume this is about the notice," he said dryly. "You assume right," I snapped, slapping the letter onto his desk. "This is nonsense. My tree is healthy. I have an arborist report that proves it. You can't fine me for imaginary violations." He glanced at the paper but didn't pick it up. The board received a formal complaint. Multiple complaints, in fact. "We're obligated to investigate. Let me guess," I said coldly. "Karen." His lips twitched, almost a smirk. "I can't disclose complainants. You don't need to. She's the only one obsessed enough to keep pushing this." I leaned in closer. "And let's not pretend this is about safety. This is harassment, plain and simple." Whitaker sighed, folding his hands on the desk. "Look, you can appeal at the next meeting. Bring your documentation. Make your case. But until then, the fine stands." I left the office fuming. An appeal meant another circus, another chance for Karen to spin her lies in front of the neighborhood. And this time, she'd have the board backing her, because technically the notice had their seal. The weeks leading up to the meeting were a slow torture. Every time I pulled into my driveway, I saw neighbors glancing at the tree, whispering. Some avoided me, afraid to take sides. Others shook their heads, muttering about troublemakers in the community. Karen, of course, basked in the attention. She strutted down the sidewalks, clipboard in hand, as if she were already HOA president. Finally, the night arrived. The community hall buzzed with chatter as residents filled the chairs. I sat near the front, arborist report clutched tightly, pulse drumming in my ears. Karen sat 2 rows back, smiling like a cat waiting for the mouse to trip. The meeting started with the usual monotony budget updates, security patrol reports, but I barely heard them. My mind was fixed on the inevitable. And then, right on cue, Whitaker cleared his throat. Next on the agenda, property violation appeal concerning 112 Maple Drive. Every head turned toward me. I stood, forcing my voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, this so-called violation is baseless. My oak tree is healthy. I have here an inspection report from a licensed arborist." I held it up for all to see, stating clearly that the tree poses no danger. This isn't about safety. This is about harassment from one individual who refuses to accept facts. Karen shot up from her seat before I even finished. "Harassment? You're endangering our entire neighborhood," she barked. "That tree is a monster. Its roots are cracking sidewalks. Its branches hang over the road. Do you want a child to die when it finally snaps?" Gasps rippled through the room. She was a master of dramatics, her voice trembling just enough to sound concerned instead of crazed. She pulled out her own stack of papers, photos of fallen trees from news clippings, dramatic images of crushed cars and broken roofs. None of them had anything to do with my property, but she waved them like smoking guns. "This is what happens when homeowners ignore the risks," she cried. "Are we going to wait until it's too late? Or are we going to act now, before tragedy strikes?" The room buzzed with uneasy murmurs. A few neighbors nodded, swayed by her theatrics. Others looked skeptical, but their silence was dangerous. Silence meant the board could interpret it however they pleased. I raised my voice over the noise. "Scare tactics don't make something true. That tree is safe. This is nothing but a personal vendetta. Today it's my tree. Tomorrow it could be your fence, your dog, your paint color, whatever Karen decides she doesn't like. If we let her weaponize the HOA, none of us are safe." That struck a chord. A few neighbors clapped. One man shouted, "He's right." Another woman added, "Karen fined me for having the wrong trash cans." Laughter and grumbles followed. For the first time that night, Karen's confident smile faltered. Whitaker banged his gavel. "Order." He leaned back, sighing heavily. "We've heard both sides. The board will deliberate." Minutes dragged like hours as the board members whispered among themselves. My palms were slick with sweat. Karen sat rigid, her eyes locked on them like she could bend their decision with sheer will. Finally, Whitaker cleared his throat. "The board has reviewed the evidence. While we acknowledge the concerns raised, we find insufficient cause to enforce removal of the tree. The violation and fine are rescinded." Relief flooded me, so powerful I almost sat back down without realizing it. Around me, a handful of neighbors clapped again, louder this time. Karen's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. She opened her mouth to protest, but Whitaker cut her off with a sharp, "Decision stands." Next agenda item. The meeting rolled on, but Karen never stopped glaring at me. Her fury radiated like heat, promising retribution. I knew this wasn't the end. She had lost again, but each defeat only seemed to harden her resolve. When the meeting finally adjourned, I stepped outside into the cool night air. The oak tree loomed in the distance, its branches swaying gently, like it was applauding my victory. Neighbors patted my shoulder, some smiling, some shaking their heads at Karen's antics. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. But as I walked home, I caught sight of Karen across the parking lot. She wasn't leaving with the others. She was on her phone, pacing furiously, her free hand slicing the air with sharp gestures. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't planning her next complaint. She was planning her revenge. And when it came, it wouldn't be through meetings or fines. It would be something far worse. The days after the meeting felt deceptively calm, like the eye of a storm. On the surface, life in Willow Creek returned to normal. Kids rode their bikes, sprinklers ticked across perfect lawns, neighbors waved politely as they passed. But underneath it all, there was tension, unspoken but undeniable. And at the center of it was Karen. She didn't speak to me directly anymore. No snide comments at the mailbox, no dramatic accusations in the street. Instead, she watched. Always watching. If I stepped outside, I'd catch her curtain shift. If I trimmed the hedges, she'd appear on her porch, scribbling notes on her clipboard. Once, I saw her snapping pictures of my yard with her phone, zooming in like a detective building a case. At first, I thought she was just gathering ammo for her next HOA stunt. But then small, unsettling things started happening. One morning, I found a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. "Unapproved lawn ornament," it read. Confused, I walked around to the side yard and spotted it. A cheap plastic flamingo I'd never seen before stuck into the soil, glaring pink against the grass. I yanked it out and tossed it, shaking my head. 2 weeks later, another notice appeared. Unauthorized trash bins visible from street. Except my bins had been tucked neatly behind the fence, where they always were until someone dragged them out overnight and left them in plain view. Each time, I fixed the problem, filed an appeal, and had the fines rescinded. But it didn't matter. Karen wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to exhaust me. She was turning the HOA system into a weapon. Neighbors started noticing death by 1,000 Mrs. Callahan from across the street whispered to me one afternoon, "She's going too far." We all see it. Even Mr. Green, who usually kept his nose buried in his gardening, muttered, "That woman needs help, not power." But Karen thrived on the chaos. She strutted through the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff, snapping photos, scribbling notes, whispering in ears. She was no longer just after me. Anyone who crossed her path felt the sting. A neighbor's kid left his bike by the sidewalk violation notice. Someone's dog barked past curfew violation notice. The board was drowning in complaints, most traced back to her, but she didn't care. She had found her power. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, close to midnight, when I heard it. A metallic scrape, faint but deliberate, coming from outside. At first I thought it was raccoons knocking over the trash, but then I heard voices. Low, urgent whispers. My stomach knotted. I slipped to the window and peered out. There, under the dim glow of the street lamp, were two figures. One held a ladder. The other gripped a long saw, its blade catching the light. And standing beside them, arms folded, was Karen. My heart stopped. She hadn't given up on the tree. She was trying again, this time in the dead of night. I grabbed my phone, fumbling with the camera. The record button glowed red as I zoomed in, catching every detail. Karen pointing at the branches, the men lifting the ladder, the saw blade glinting. My pulse thundered, but I forced myself to stay quiet. Let them dig their own graves. Just as the ladder scraped against the trunk, I dialed 911. My voice was low, steady. Yes, I'd like to report trespassers attempting to cut down my tree. They're here right now. Yes, I have video. The dispatcher assured me officers were on the way. I kept recording, heart pounding with every second. The men climbed higher, teeth of the saw biting into the first branch, when suddenly blue and red lights flashed down the street. Karen's head snapped up. The men froze. The sirens wailed closer, filling the night with their rising scream until two patrol cars screeched to a stop in front of my house. Hands where we can see them. An officer shouted, flooding the yard with his flashlight. The workers scrambled down the ladder, dropping the saw in panic. Karen tried to protest, waving her arms wildly. This is a community matter. I'm authorized. I'm with the HOA. But the officers weren't buying it. One of them turned to me, still standing on my porch with my phone raised. "Sir, you the homeowner?" "Yes," I said firmly, voice carrying across the yard. "And I never gave them permission to touch my tree. I have the whole thing on video. That sealed it." The officers collected statements, cuffed the workers, and finally turned to Karen. She sputtered, red-faced, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that she was only trying to protect the neighborhood. But when they informed her she was under investigation for trespassing and property damage conspiracy, the fight drained from her face. The neighbors had poured out by then, lining the sidewalks in pajamas and slippers, phones out, recording everything. Whispers filled the night, punctuated by the click of handcuffs. For once, the woman who had thrived on public attention found herself the star of a very different kind of show. As the officers led her toward the squad car, she caught my eye. For the first time since this war began, her expression wasn't rage or smug superiority. It was something closer to panic. "You'll regret this," she hissed, voice trembling. But it lacked the bite it once had. It sounded more like a prayer than a threat. The door slammed shut, and the car rolled away, its lights painting red and blue streaks across the oak tree that still stood tall and unbroken. The crowd lingered, buzzing with disbelief. Some laughed nervously, Others shook their heads. Mrs. Callahan whispered, "Well, I guess karma finally came knocking." I just stood there, staring at the tree, my chest rising and falling with the weight of it all. After months of battles, Karen had finally crossed the line she could never step back from. And in doing so, she had sealed her own fate. But even as the crowd dispersed and the sirens faded, I couldn't shake one thought with people like Karen. Even rock bottom isn't always the end. Sometimes it's just another excuse to claw their way back up, sharper and more dangerous than before. And I knew, deep down, this story wasn't finished yet. The night after Karen's arrest, Willow Creek didn't sleep. Porch lights stayed on long after midnight, curtains fluttered with curious faces, and neighbors gathered in quiet clusters, trading whispers like contraband. For years, Karen had been the storm cloud hanging over our neighborhood. And now, for the first time, people saw lightning strike her instead of us. I woke the next morning, half expecting it had all been a dream. But when I stepped outside, the evidence was there. Tire marks from the squad cars, footprints pressed into the damp grass, and my oak tree still standing tall, its leaves swaying as if applauding the drama. By noon, the gossip mill was in overdrive. Mrs. Callahan intercepted me at the mailbox, lowering her voice though half the street was already listening. "They say she spent the night in holding. Can you imagine? Karen, in a cell." She let out a chuckle, then covered her mouth like laughing at Karen's downfall was a guilty pleasure. Others weren't so subtle. Kids on bikes circled her house, chanting "Jailbird Karen" before speeding off when her husband stormed out to chase them away. For once, her clipboard power had evaporated, and the neighborhood smelled blood in the water. But I knew better than to celebrate. People like Karen didn't go down quietly. 2 days later, the HOA called an emergency board meeting. The room was more crowded than ever, buzzing with energy. You could feel it the moment you stepped in, the tension, the curiosity, the anticipation of a showdown. Karen wasn't there, of course, but her shadow stretched long across every conversation. The president, Mr. Whitaker, tapped his gavel with an edge of irritation. "We're here to discuss recent events involving board member Karen Wilcox." That was the first time I'd heard her last name spoken out loud in one of these meetings. It sounded almost foreign, like stripping her title made her less powerful. He cleared his throat. "As many of you know, Ms. Wilcox was detained by police last week on allegations of trespassing and attempted property damage. Until the investigation concludes, she has been suspended from all HOA duties." The room erupted in murmurs. Some gasped, some whispered, some clapped outright. I stayed quiet, watching. A man from the back row stood up. "Suspended? That's it? She hired men to cut down someone's tree in the middle of the night. That's not a suspension, that's criminal." Another neighbor shouted, "She's been harassing us all for years. Enough's enough. She should be removed permanently." Whitaker raised his hands for calm, but even he couldn't hide his discomfort. The board was used to running meetings in silence, but tonight the crowd had found its voice. I took my chance and stood. "Look, we all know Karen didn't just cross a line, she bulldozed it. But this isn't just about one tree. It's about how she turned the HOA into her personal weapon. Every bogus violation, every fake complaint, she's been using this system against us. And if we don't put an end to it now, what's to stop the next Karen from doing the same?" Applause broke out louder this time. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact were clapping openly, nodding, even standing. For the first time, I wasn't the lone target of Karen's wrath. I was the voice of the neighborhood. Whitaker looked flustered, his polished composure cracking. "These are serious allegations. The board will need to review bylaws before any permanent action." "Bylaws?" Mrs. Callahan cut him off, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard. "Karen wrote half of those bylaws. and she twisted the rest. We're tired of hiding behind paperwork. We want her gone. The room roared in agreement. Someone shouted, "Vote her out." Another added, "She doesn't represent us anymore." Whitaker glanced at the other board members, clearly rattled. They whispered among themselves, faces tight, then finally nodded. He sighed, tapping the gavel again. "Very well. The board will call a special election to determine Ms. Wilcox's status. Until then, she remains suspended." It wasn't the permanent removal everyone wanted, but it was a crack in her armor. For once, the system she had manipulated so masterfully was turning against her. That night, as I walked home under the glow of the streetlights, I felt something shift. The fear that had hung over Willow Creek for so long was thinning, replaced by something almost foreign, unity. Neighbors who had once whispered in private now talked openly in driveways, voices rising with anger not at me, but at her. But victory came with an edge of unease. Because while the board debated bylaws and elections, Karen herself remained silent. No angry rants, no letters, no violations taped to doors. Her house sat dark, curtains drawn, a fortress of quiet. And silence, when it came from Karen, was far more dangerous than noise. One evening, a week later, I was sitting on my porch when I saw her. Just a glimpse, Karen slipping out to her SUV, glancing around before hurrying inside. She looked different, smaller somehow, like the weight of her crumbling empire had bent her spine. But when her eyes flicked across the street and met mine, I saw it again, that flicker of rage smoldering, alive. She hadn't given up. She was waiting, and as much as the neighborhood wanted to believe her reign was ending, I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to bow out gracefully. She was the type to drag everyone down with her if it meant she didn't lose alone. The oak tree swayed overhead, leaves whispering in the night air, as if it, too, sensed the storm that still brewed beneath the quiet, because in Willow Creek, peace was never permanent. And with Karen, the story was far from finished. The silence didn't last long. It never does with Karen. For weeks, the neighborhood lingered in that uneasy calm, like the air before a thunderstorm. Kids played louder in the streets, neighbors smiled wider, and for a fleeting moment, Willow Creek felt lighter. But in the back of everyone's mind lingered the same thought. What was she planning? I didn't have to wait long for the answer. It started small, the way it always did. A notice slipped into my mailbox unsigned, anonymous, but written in that sharp, passive-aggressive tone that could only belong to one person. Your oak tree poses a danger to the community. Failure to address it may result in legal consequences. I laughed when I read it. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. Karen was clawing for control, scratching at the walls of her crumbling empire. I crumpled the paper and tossed it aside. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a warning. It was a signal. The next week, more neighbors found notes taped to their doors. Complaints about paint colors, fence heights, even lawn ornaments. All unsigned, but unmistakable. It was as if Karen had declared war from behind the safety of her curtains. And then came the night of her reckless move. I was jolted awake at 2 in the morning by the low growl of an engine. At first, I thought it was just some teenager joyrting through the neighborhood. But when I peeked out my window, I saw it, headlights crawling slowly past my house, pausing just long enough to illuminate my oak tree. The car idled there for a moment, then rolled forward, stopping in front of the Callahans. Another pause, another scan of their yard. Then it moved again. My heart raced. I didn't need to see the driver to know who it was. Karen wasn't just angry, she was scouting. The next morning, tire tracks carved fresh scars into the Callahans' lawn. A fence post had been knocked loose, splinters scattered like shrapnel. Nobody saw it happen, but everyone knew. And this time, they weren't willing to stay quiet. By afternoon, Half the neighborhood had gathered in front of my porch. Mr. Callahan held the broken fence post like a trophy, his voice booming with fury. "We've had enough. She's out of control. Someone's going to get hurt." For once, the whispers had become shouts. People weren't just gossiping anymore. They were organizing. Plans for petitions, talk of restraining orders, even murmurs about lawsuits. Karen had gone too far, and the tide had officially turned. But Karen, true to form, wasn't done escalating. 2 nights later, the sound of chainsaws split the quiet. I shot up in bed, heart hammering, and rushed to the window. There, under the pale wash of a streetlight, 2 men in hoodies were hacking away at the base of my oak tree. "Hey!" I yelled, throwing open the window. The men froze, then bolted, dropping their tools as they disappeared into the dark. I didn't see her, but I didn't need to. Those men weren't working on their own. They had been sent. And there was only one person desperate enough, reckless enough, to orchestrate something so bold that the police came within minutes. Flashlights swept across the lawn, voices echoed through the night, and neighbors gathered in robes and slippers, clutching coffee mugs like shields. One officer knelt by the abandoned chainsaw, muttering under his breath, "Looks like they knew what they were doing." Another few minutes and this thing would have come down. The realization hit me like a punch. Karen hadn't just wanted to punish me. She'd wanted that oak tree gone for good. Whether it fell on my house or someone else's, the chaos it caused would have been her victory. But this time, her recklessness backfired. The police weren't just investigating trespassing now. They had fingerprints, abandoned tools, and witnesses who'd finally found their courage. The story spread like wildfire. By sunrise, everyone in Willow Creek knew what had happened, and for the first time, they weren't just angry, they were scared. If Karen was willing to send strangers into our yards in the dead of night, what else was she capable of? The next HOA meeting was the loudest yet. Neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder, voices rising with urgency. Even Whitaker, once the calm, polished leader, looked shaken. He didn't bother with formalities this time. "This has gone beyond HOA disputes," he said, his voice trembling. "This is criminal. We will cooperate fully with authorities, and as of this moment, Karen Wilcox is permanently removed from the board." The room erupted. Cheers, claps, even tears. After years of fear and silence, Karen's reign had finally cracked wide open. But I didn't celebrate. Not yet, because as I walked home that night, I glanced at Karen's house. The windows were dark, the curtains still drawn, but I could feel her watching. I could feel her rage pressing against the glass. Thick and poisonous. Karen had lost her title, her power, her influence. But she hadn't lost her pride. And people like Karen, they're most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose. The oak tree stood tall, scarred but unbroken, its branches swaying defiantly in the night breeze. And as I looked up at it, I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't over, because if Karen couldn't rule Willow Creek, she'd rather burn it down. The neighborhood was bracing itself. After the chainsaw incident, after the board's decision to strip her of power, Willow Creek lived on edge. People locked their gates at night, kept porch lights burning until dawn, and whispered to each other in parking lots and at mailboxes. Everyone felt the same way. Karen was cornered, and a cornered Karen was dangerous. For a week, her house sat dark, lifeless, like the set of an abandoned play. No cars in the driveway, no barking dog, no sudden appearances with a clipboard clutched like a sword. It was too quiet, and that silence pressed on us like the heavy stillness before a tornado. Then came the night everything snapped. I was up late, working at my desk, when I caught it out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement outside. At first, I thought it was just shadows cast by the streetlight. But then the sound followed, the crunch of footsteps across my lawn. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be a raccoon. I crept to the window, heart pounding, and there she was, Karen, standing under my oak tree with a gas can in her hand. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. She wasn't trying to cut it down this time. She was trying to destroy it completely. She unscrewed the cap, tilted the can, and the sharp, unmistakable smell of gasoline hit the air. The liquid glistened as it splashed against the roots, the bark, soaking into the ground like poison. I snapped into motion, fumbling for my phone as adrenaline surged. 911, I whispered, forcing my voice steady. My neighbor's trying to burn down my tree. Please, hurry. But Karen wasn't done. She pulled something from her pocket, a lighter. She flicked it once, twice, the flame sputtering in the night air. My chest seized. If that flame caught, the oak would become a torch, the fire spreading to my home, to the Callahans, to half the block. I banged on the window. Karen, stop. Her head snapped up, and for a split second, our eyes locked. What I saw wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even spite. It was desperation, raw and feral, like she had nothing left but this one final act of destruction. The lighter flared. I bolted out the front door, shouting, "Drop it!" My voice cracked through the quiet like thunder. Porch lights flicked on up and down the street. Curtains snapped back. Neighbors stepped onto lawns, groggy but alert, drawn by the noise. Karen froze, her arm trembling, flame hovering inches above gasoline-soaked roots. A dozen voices rose at once, shouting her name, begging her to stop. And then came the sirens. Red and blue lights exploded across the cul-de-sac, washing everything in color. 2 squad cars skidded to a halt, officers leaping out, weapons drawn. Drop it now. One of them barked. Karen's hand shook violently. For a terrifying moment, I thought she'd do it anyway, that she'd strike the match against all of us. Consequences be damned. But her grip faltered, the lighter slipping from her fingers and clattering against the roots. The officers surged forward, tackling her to the ground before she could move again. Gasoline stained her clothes, her hair clung to her face, and still she fought, screaming, "This is my neighborhood." Mine. The sound was primal, a howl tearing through the night as they wrestled her wrists into handcuffs. The neighbors stood in stunned silence, faces pale in the strobing light, as Karen's reign ended not with a meeting, not with a vote, but with her being dragged away, kicking and thrashing like a wild animal. When the patrol car door slammed shut, the quiet that followed was suffocating. Nobody spoke at first. We just stood there, watching as the car pulled away, taillights shrinking into the distance, carrying with it the woman who had ruled our lives for years. Finally, Mrs. Callahan whispered, almost to herself, "It's over." And it was. The fire department came to hose down the tree, washing away the gasoline before it could spark. Neighbors lingered in clusters, talking in hushed tones, glancing at each other with disbelief. For the first time, we weren't united by fear of Karen, but by the relief of her absence. I stood under the oak tree, its bark slick and dark, and laid my hand against it. It was scarred, yes, but it had survived. Just like the neighborhood. Just like me. The days that followed felt surreal. Karen was charged with attempted arson and reckless endangerment. Word spread fast, faster than even her wildest violations had. Willow Creek had a new story now, one not of fear, but of freedom. People started repainting their homes the colors they'd always wanted. Kids left bikes on sidewalks without worrying about fines. Lawns grew a little wilder, gardens a little brighter. Life returned, messy and imperfect and real. And yet, sometimes, when I walk past Karen's empty house, I can still feel the echo of her presence. The blinds are drawn, the yard unkempt, the mailbox stuffed with weeks of forgotten mail. It's a shell now, A monument to everything she tried to control but never truly owned. The oak tree towers above it all, roots deep, branches wide, stronger than ever. It stands as a reminder of the night Karen nearly burned it all down, and how close we came to losing everything. But it also stands as proof that we endured, that even in the shadow of her chaos, we found our way back to light. Karen had tried to rule Willow Creek through fear, but in the end, she only succeeded in uniting us against her. And maybe that's the irony of it all, that her greatest act of destruction became the very thing that built something stronger, because the neighborhood isn't hers anymore. It never really was. It belongs to all of us. And this time, we're not letting anyone take that away. Months passed, and Willow Creek began to look like a neighborhood again instead of a battlefield. Lawns bloomed with color where once they were measured against Karen's impossible standards. Kids raced their bikes down the street without their parents nervously glancing at windows. Porch lights glowed warm, not as watchtowers, but as invitations for late-night talks between neighbors who had once only nodded in silence. The oak tree, though scarred, thrived. Each season it seemed to stretch higher, its branches wider, as if defying the storm that once threatened to destroy it. I often found myself sitting beneath its shade, listening to the rustle of its leaves like a whispered promise. You survived, and you're stronger for it. Karen never came back. Her house stood empty, a hollow reminder of her reign, until eventually a for sale sign appeared in the yard. People whispered about who might buy it, but no one feared the future anymore. We had learned something vital, that unity is stronger than intimidation, that silence only feeds control, and that even the loudest tyrants can be brought down when a community stands together. For me, it was more than a battle over a tree. It was proof that when you fight for what's right, no matter how small it seems, others will find their courage too. One voice becomes many, and many voices can change everything. And if you've been with me through this story, if you felt the tension, the anger, the relief, then you already know this isn't just a story about an HOA. It's about resilience, about standing tall when someone tries to cut you down, and about never letting fear decide who holds the power in your life. So if you want more stories like this, raw, dramatic, and real, make sure you stick around. This is Listen HOA Stories, and trust me, the next one is just as unbelievable.